Okay. Cool. Everything, not everything, but most things seem to be working. So we do still have a ways to go in our study of the book of Jeremiah. And I really would like to encourage you once again to read ahead a little bit each week. So that way we might have some more questions or some insight or things like that that can make our discussion time afterwards a little bit more productive. Um, One of the cool things that I see when I read through the pages of this book is that I really can't think of another place in the Bible that has quite as much emphasis on the heart. Okay, the heart of God, which we're going to get into deeply in a couple of weeks, and also the heart of man. And so Jeremiah has been given like X-ray vision into the heart of the matter here. And the way that Jeremiah communicates about the heart of man is often pretty memorable, I think. And so he not only just says things kind of just like they are, but he also uses sort of images, word images, to bring clarity and to sort of catch our attention. And so a few teachings ago, he was I think Josh did this one, but he was talking about the idols that dwell in our hearts, and he said that we go to these idols and they're like a broken cistern that won't hold water. And so just like the futility that that conveys, okay, and he said that that's the condition of humanity. And so this morning we're going to look at another little word picture of Jeremiah's, and this one deals with affluence. Okay, so it's sort of an ironic and paradoxical way that like Jeremiah juxtaposes affluence, which is a value that we all have to one degree or another, with being in a cage, all right, which is something that we would not regularly associate with that. And so we think of wealth and we mostly associate it with it being one of the keys to freedom and liberty. But in many ways, we're wrong. Okay, and so that's where we're headed this morning. Good luck. Enjoy this. We're just going to start by looking at the text. This is Jeremiah 27 and 5, or Jeremiah 5, 27 and 28. This is kind of the only two verses we're doing this morning. And 27 says that like a cage full of birds, so their houses are full of deceit. So they have become great and rich. And so it's not super easy or clear right away to tell what he's talking about. Where are my glasses? All right. But it is clear that he's talking about wealth, okay? And specifically, he's talking about the ethics of wealth. Okay, and the Bible's view of the ethics of wealth. And so that's kind of where we're going to start. And there is a point that needs to be made. And, we've made this point before, even in this study. And so Israel existed in this great land of promise that God had given them. And Israel is given the privilege of divine protection in that area. And so we made the point at the very beginning of this study that God placed Israel at a very difficult and valuable cross-section of geography. All right, it's like at the crossroads of three continents. And if you were going to go anywhere in the ancient world of any distance, you were going to go through Israel. And so God put his people there not just for them, but to be a light to all people. And as long as those people subordinate themselves to God's contract or the Mosaic law, God is going to protect his people. And he's also going to provide for their needs. Okay, so this is no small thing in an agricultural society where a single dry season can be the difference between life and death. Okay, this promise was tangible. They would have their harvest as long as they obeyed the terms, okay, of the covenant that binds them to God. It's just how it worked for them. And in a deeper way, in understanding the biblical picture here, God kind of owns the whole earth. All right, so Psalms 24:1 says that the earth and all that it contains are the Lord's. And God, in his goodness, wants to share the good things that he's made. And so when we think about wealth in our culture, we get a little bit confused. It's actually really difficult for us to distinguish between our political rights as Americans and the way that God has set up the spiritual order of things. Okay, so we believe in private ownership of property, and I think that the Bible is cool with that. The Bible's not really a socialist book in any way. But on the other hand, what the Bible is saying is that we're granted the things that God has created as a blessing from him that we're supposed to enjoy. And so in that sense, we're essentially availing ourselves of things that we did not create. Okay, these things are God's. And after we're gone, these things remain God's. And so the idea is that we're just sort of borrowing or stewarding the possessions that God has over the course of our life. And so when we look at the abundance that we enjoy in that sort of framework, all of the riches and the abundance that Western culture has to offer, this is all just an abundant gift from God. And it's really important that we reflect on that a little bit. Okay, you didn't create this land or provide the things that allow this land to be prosperous. And of course, some people have more initiative than others, and some people capitalize on the system a little bit more than other people. But we sort of need to ask a further question that the Bible asks. All right, so let's just say that you've applied yourself and you've taken advantage of the available opportunities and you've become wealthy. Okay, and that's true to some extent of each one of us in this room. Okay, we are a wealthy people, maybe not relative to one another, but in the grand scheme of things, we are wealthy. And God would have us remember where it is that we got the mind that allows us to apply it to the acquisition of wealth. Okay, or where we got the personality that enables us to endear ourselves to the advantageous people around us. Okay, did you earn that stuff? Did you earn your time and place in history? Of course not. Okay, so God is reminding us that he does want to bless us. But all of the means that we have to secure those blessings are a gift from him. Okay, the earth is his and all that it contains. That's what that means. That's what the Bible teaches. Okay, and it also teaches that God does desire to richly bless his people, but not as an end unto itself. Okay, so God wants to bless us so that we can be a blessing, so that we can be his provision to other people. Okay, God blesses us so that we can be a blessing. And as modern American people, we tend to view prosperity as something that is kind of just separate from morality and separate from spirituality. Okay, there's just not really a strong connection between wealth and those other important areas for us. But when we talk about material prosperity in the view of the Bible, we are talking about something that we can apply morality to. Okay, there is such a thing as justice in regard to this topic. And Jeremiah is going to show us that in a minute. Okay, and this is also a spiritual matter. And as this world stands, wealth is neither morally or spiritually neutral. Okay, and so Jesus put it like this: where your treasures lie, there will your heart lie also. And it's really important that we realize that the things that we pursue, the things that we want most in life and therefore conform our lives to, are a very strong statement of what it is that we value the most. Okay, and what we're really about. All right, so then verse 28 here, he goes on to say, they are fat They are sleek, excelling in deeds of wickedness. They do not plead the cause of the orphan, that they may prosper, and they do not defend the rights of the poor. All right, and so he's saying that about the people that God has blessed with great wealth. And so Jeremiah is kind of getting up in these people's faces here. He's reminding them that God blessed them so that they could be a blessing. And they've totally forgotten sort of the second half of that clause. They sure like receiving the blessing. Okay, they just don't really care for being a blessing very much. And, here we need to do just a little bit of background work and review some of the things that are going on in this southern kingdom of Judah that God had already stated very clearly would be the deal with these people. Okay, so they've known some things for like 800 years that God had stated in the law of Moses that had to do with the blessings from God and how the stewardship of those blessings are supposed to relate to people that do not have quite so much. All right, so here's what he says in Jeremiah 22:16. It says, "He pled the cause of the afflicted and needy. Then it was well. Is not that what it means to know me, declares the Lord." So people like to say that they know God, or that they're into the things of God, or that they've got something real going on with God. But they usually just mean that they read the verse of the day, okay, or that they go to church most Sundays. And Jeremiah is saying here the exact same thing that Jesus says in Matthew 25, okay? That is that there is one clear measure of what it means to know God. And that is that a person that knows God and has something real going on with him is driven to have God's perspective on the rest of the world. Okay, to know God in that sense is to pick up the cause of the afflicted and the needy. Because to know God and to know that He's into that means that it becomes the passion of your heart as well. So to the extent that we are turning a blind eye to the pressing needs and concerns of the people around us in the world, makes a powerful statement. Okay, it says that you don't really know in any penetrating way the living God. Okay, this is a litmus test issue according to the Bible. And so Jeremiah is bringing up the law in order to set the foundation for how it is that he can go after these people and point out the problems that they have that are spiritual and that are moral. Okay, the basis of this discussion he's having is the law of Moses. And very specifically, it's the Sabbath law. Okay, so is today the Sabbath? No, yesterday was. It's the seventh day. Okay, Sabbath is a Hebrew word that just means seven. So did you know that there are also Sabbath year legislations in the Mosaic Law? So every seventh year, God is also interested in the conduct of the people in Israel. All right, so Leviticus 25 says, and this one is about the Sabbath of Sabbath years, meaning that the year after 7 times 7 years. So if you're following the math, that's 49 plus 1 years. So this is called the Jubilee year, every 50 years. And so it says, the 50th year will be a Jubilee for you. Each of you may return to the land that belonged to your ancestors. If any Israelite has not been redeemed by Jubilee year, they must be set free. They are my servants I bought out of Egypt. So, here's the deal. God is saying that He's not into, generational amassing of wealth, all right, where certain people have advantage, and so they take advantage of those who do not. And ultimately, over a period of a few generations, you kind of end up with a permanent situation where there are people who are the haves, and then there are the have-nots. And so when you were like completely broke in the ancient world, you still had your physical body. And so there's provision in the Hebrew law where you can indenture yourself as a servant to another person. Okay, and then that other person would take care of you and your family's physical needs in exchange for your labor. And this was very common in the ancient world. And what God is saying is that that provision is all good, but it's not good enough to go on indefinitely. So every 50th year, everyone gets to go home and start over. All right, they get to start their own process of generating their own living and living before God. All right, that was God's plan. And in a lot of ways, this is pretty cool. Okay, this really encompasses the idea that it's all God's land anyway. God's making sure that all of his people have the chance to prosper and take advantage of his blessings. Okay, it's built into the law. And so this is how God intended to deal with the problem of poverty. He created a circumstance where every generation the people would learn from the law what it looks like to really take care of their neighbor. And what it looks like to not have more than you need at the expense of someone who doesn't have anything. Okay, it's a cool idea. But the thing is, for these people, it's not just good advice. Okay, this is not just God's economic theory. This is law. And because God is compassionate and he cares for all people, his people need to be that way too. And if they're not, if they do not return the people to their land every 50 years, and if they do not let the land lie fallow every 7 years, God is going to enforce the covenant that they're in. All right, so in Leviticus 26, it says, I will scatter you among the nations. Your land will become desolate, and your cities will lie in ruin. Then at last, the land will enjoy its neglected Sabbath years as it lies desolate while you are in exile. So this is what Jeremiah is alluding to. Okay, so he's saying that the people are going to go into exile for 70 years because 70 times they did not honor the Sabbath year legislation. Okay, the land is going to get its rest. But because they didn't give it its rest, God is going to give it its rest while the people are on extended holiday in Babylon. All right, and so this is apparently something that God is pretty serious about. Okay, that's the context for what we're talking about. And so when the people are wondering, why God's letting this happen to them, Jeremiah is bringing to their attention, just what God had said all along. And so God didn't lay these laws out as a suggestion. They're a covenant that is to be enforced. And it's time for that enforcement in the history of Israel. And so Babylon is essentially there to give the land the rest that the people didn't give it. That's the broad framework of what we're talking about. But what we're going to focus on mostly this morning is this metaphor here, where God, through Jeremiah, says in verse 27 that they are like a cage full of birds. Okay, and so here we're talking about what we call the irony of wealth. And so not only is there an injustice that is captivating the land, you also have these rich people that have more than they need. And Jeremiah is saying that that's a problem too. It just isn't good for the affluent to maintain the attitudes about their wealth that they do. It's like a distortion of their soul. And so their attitudes create social barriers and barriers before God. And so it's as though these people have like a nice padded cell that looks nice, but they're locked into it. They're stuck in cages of affluence. And so it's kind of a bizarre little piece of irony, right? And I think that this makes this discussion of affluence that Jeremiah was dealing with centuries ago very applicable to us today. And so we're gonna look at this a minute. And so the cage, of course, cages are like the same as slavery, right? You're trapped. And does God want his people to be enslaved? No. He's gone to great lengths to redeem his people from slavery. He wants them to be free. And so in what sense can affluence be a cage for you, who is the bird in this metaphor, right? And so the first is that wealth affects how we view reality. All right, we see the world through the lens of our experience. And things that we do not experience kind of seem like they're very unreal. And God calls his people to a freedom that allows them to see clearly the way that things really are. All right, so in a world full of sinful people like you and me, we tend to lose perspective. Okay, we live in an amazing island of affluence. And yet, many of us have thoughts that are like we're just barely scraping by. Okay, we think like we are so very poor. We think about all of the things that we would so like to have, but we just can't afford it. All right, we're so poor. You ever feel that way? Right, you ever get the weekend paper? I mean, that's probably not a thing anymore, but I hope you get what I mean. And you see all those shiny new things, and you start to think about how junky your old like tube TV is or whatever, you know, what a piece of crap your car is, or all of the things that your house still needs in order to be perfect. It's really easy to get wrapped up in all the things that we do not have. Okay, and so we're living in a culture where we're working harder and harder, more hours per household than at any other time in American history. So, like, we like to give the Asian cultures a bad rap, where they're like these ant-like people that work all the time. I used to follow international politics, and I remember the Prime Minister of France got in trouble for making a comment like that once. But the truth is that it's American households that work more hours per capita than Japanese or Korean households. Okay, we lose perspective on this very easily, and we think that we don't have enough. All right, we're gonna look at this and try and get some real perspective here. So, there are 8 billion people on the planet right now, almost, and you're about to witness the pinnacle of evolution in graphic art. And I'm going to represent that 8 billion people in a couple of different ways, chopped up by income. All right, and so this is statistical data from the World Bank. I didn't make this up. And the idea here is to try and produce a clarity about where we stand in relation to worldwide wealth as middle-class Americans. And so at the very bottom of the classification that the World Bank gives for income, they call it low income. And so this number represents as much better than it did a few years ago, but that's partly because of some changes in the way that they measure it. And most of this data today is from 2023. And so this is currently measuring at a bit over 9% of the world population. All right, that's 712 million people that are living on less than $2.15 per day. Okay, that's the amount of money that you have to feed your family and educate your children and put a roof over your head and anything else. Okay, and it's not as though food is somehow, way cheaper in the parts of the world that experience this kind of poverty. Okay, and so one of the bizarre unintended consequences of our infatuation with biofuels is that the price of grain is very high worldwide. And most of these third world countries import their grain. All right, so their food is actually more expensive than ours in some cases. And so if you move to the next and the largest percentage of the world population, this is what the World Bank classifies as lower middle income. 4.7 billion people live worldwide at this level of income. Okay, it's almost 60%. And together, these two classifications of income add up to the overwhelming majority of the population of the world. All right, so the people in the lower middle income group subsist on $12.23 per day. And maybe that's starting to sound like it isn't so bad. Okay, maybe you think you could manage that. But that's an annual income of around $4,465. Okay, and so some of you spent more than that on your dog. These people are doing much better than the people in the low income classification. All right, every couple of days, these folks can put some kind of meat on the table for their kids. And this also means that maybe one of your children is going to be able to go to school. Okay, school's not free for much of the world. You have to buy uniforms and buy books, and at this level of income, many families manage to send one child. All right, so moving up to the next classification, this is the upper middle income level, and this is about 15% of the world. All right, the upper limit for this classification is $13,845 per year. Okay, and that means that these people are doing pretty good. These people have a roof over their head. They have reliable food. Most of the kids can go to school. All right, and so then the top classification that the World Bank puts people into is the high income people. And this is another 16%, right? About 1.15 billion people worldwide. And they live on anything over the $13,845 a year that is the upper limit of the upper middle income classification. Okay, and so this is most of what makes up the first world. These people are not just scraping by. They have enough to meet their own needs and even help other people meet their needs. These people have access to health care most of the time, access to food, also housing, education, that kind of stuff. All right, and so I've broken out 1% of the high income category, and I called it the economic elite of the world. Okay, this is the 80 million people that live on this planet that have a household income of over $60,000 a year. Less than 1% of the world lives in this privileged place. Okay, from a global perspective, this is a place of true abundance. Okay, this is an annual number, $60,000, that is attainable for like every household in this room. Okay, many of us are making much, much more than this. Okay, this is clearly a map of the world. The countries are colored according to the World Bank classifications that we just went through. The dark purple is the low income. Okay, the lighter purple, that's lower middle. The light green, right, upper middle. The dark green is the high income countries. And the important point here is that we have some sense of proportion and perspective. Look at where we live from the rest of the world's point of view. Okay, and so the pie chart was great, but I wanted to try and show this another way. I really wanted a way to try and show the percentages in each category and also represent the vastly different amounts of money that the different classifications had. So bear with me. This is the same, approximately the same information, but with a graph that I had to build every single component of individually, and it was just too much work not to show it. Okay, so this relatively flat plane that's on the screen right now is 100% of the world's population, right? 7.7 billion people. And so this is the 9% that makes up the low income category. And remember, these people make less than $800 each year. Okay, the cap for this category is $2.15 per day. And then there's this large chunk in the middle, okay, that makes less than about $4,500 every year. This is the upper middle income chunk of people that top out at less than $14,000 annual income. Doesn't sound like very much to most of us, but look at how much higher it is than the levels below it. Okay? Here are the high income people, right here. And these people have an income between $14,000 and $60,000. And so the width of this block is not substantially different than the previous block. But look at the height difference. Okay, the disparity just to the next lower block is astounding. Not even to point out the differential between this block and the first one. Okay, and so lastly, we have the elite. And this is any household bringing in more than $60,000 a year. Okay, if any household is not in that room, in that category, then you're probably reasonably close. And so try to look at this situation from the perspective of almost anyone on the planet besides you. Okay, you are not just scraping by. You're not really in danger of going without. You have exponentially more than what practically everyone in the world possesses. And it's really important that we let a little bit of objectivity minister to our emotional life when it comes to our finances. Okay, who are the rich that Jeremiah is talking to if it's not us? All right, and there's a responsibility, there's an accountability before God for the use of his resources that we have in hyper abundance. Compared to 99% of the world's population, right? That's just a reality. Okay, and God said that he blessed you so that you can be a blessing. And if we can't find some divine view of finance, then we're going to be overcome by our possessions and we'll be enslaved by them. Okay, and so as an alternative to the distorted reality that affluence brings, the Bible puts forth the idea of contentment. Okay, gratitude that knows that you do not deserve your moment in time or the opportunities that are in front of you or the way that you're wired or your geography or anything. Okay, God has made these things available to me in his mercy. And the things that he has given to me, I have more than enough of. Okay, we have to win the battle that goes on in our hearts over the issue of gratitude. We do not need more. All right, I need to be grateful for the stuff that I have and very open-handed with the things that I don't need. Okay, that gratitude and humility in our lives produces a contentment, and that's what God is after in us. Okay, gratitude always works with contentment. And in an affluent society like ours, it's very difficult for people to distinguish between the things that we want and the things that we need, right? You know what I'm talking about, okay? Is it really that we need new clothes all the time? Okay, must you really upgrade your computer right now? Do you need a fence to finish your backyard? Whatever, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. We blur the lines. Okay, we become almost unable to distinguish between the things that we want and the things that we need. Okay, if we were actually free in this respect, we would be talking about what true wealth is. Okay, true wealth is not measured by the size of your paycheck or your bank account, okay, or your pension. Real wealth is relational wealth. God wants to make us rich in relationships. They are the only thing that matters. They're the only thing that's sustaining, and they're the only thing that's eternal. Okay, so satisfying material desire cannot produce love. The Beatles got that one right. Okay, you cannot buy love. Material possessions don't produce friendship. Okay, Clapton said years ago that no one loves you when you're down and out, but when you're rich, everyone's your best friend. Okay, he was being ironic. Closeness, joy, impact. Okay, these are the things that really do have value. These are the things that give rise to like a life well lived. Okay, this is what the Stone Temple Pilots are talking about. And they're talking about the difference between things that are real and things that are for sale. Okay, blew a kiss and tried to take it home. You guys track anybody else grow up in the 90s? All right, so the things that bring us true satisfaction are things that you cannot put a price tag on. Okay, these are things that are so precious that no amount of money can buy them. And our society has got it totally back-asswards. All right, our focus is entirely on what we can acquire, and we do not distinguish between wants and needs. And as a result, we live in a very lonely, very isolated, very competitive, very joyless, neurotic, depressed society. Okay, that's America. And there's a connection between the neuroses that drive us and the attitude that we have towards wealth. Okay, and as unpleasant as it may be for me to say it or for you to hear it, if you're sitting in this room to one degree or another, you do live in a cage of affluence. Okay, we think about how much money or how much stuff or how much security we have. But do we spend much time thinking about if we're rich toward God? Okay, are you rich in relational depth? Are you rich in friendships that are catalytic and provide a real sense of intimacy and partnership? Okay, these are the points that America fails at. Okay, so let's look at the root values here. On the left here is this recently discovered disease called pleonexia. It's not a disease, and it was not recently discovered. It's the Greek word for greed, okay, but it sounds better as a disease. And in some ways, it makes more sense as a disease, okay? And on the other side of the slide, there is generosity, all right? Greed is captivating, not liberating. Okay, generosity, on the other hand, does grant freedom. Pleonexia, greed, it's in the air that we breathe. Okay, you have a patriotic duty to go into debt and buy stuff. We live in a consumer economy and a consumer culture. And so do you really think that the economic engine that drives this culture is value neutral or spiritually neutral? Right? Or that it has your best interests in mind? It does not. Okay, and so what about the notion that if you don't have any debt, then you don't have any credit rating, and so you don't really count? Does that sound neutral? That's insane. Okay, our culture has an average credit card debt of over $15,000 per household. And I'm here to tell you that's slavery. Okay, but that's reality for us. It's in the air that we breathe. Okay, do you feel the pull? Does any of this weigh on you at all? Do you find that you've been embarrassed to talk about some of this stuff in an open way at some point or at any point? Do you sometimes feel like everything you have is crap and you just need all new stuff? Okay, I think that a lot of that stuff is normal and it's natural in our culture. Okay? The reality is that if we're not actively swimming against that tide, the current is just going to naturally pull us like right down the beach, okay, in that direction. And there should be a fight inside. There should be an internal struggle about these things. Okay, it's a struggle over values, and it's a struggle that's over your spiritual life in a lot of ways. All right. Another area of this cultural disease called pleonexia, there's a derivative virus that affects our kids. All right. Affluenza. The children of affluence. All right, there's a ton of sociological data coming out on this issue. One in particular caught my attention this week. This woman is a social psychologist, and the book is called The Price Privilege. And in it, she says, I think I'll get this thing to work. All right, in it she says that America's newly identified at-risk group is preteens and teens from affluent, well-educated families. Okay, she's talking about you. Okay, most of us are or were teens from affluent, well-educated families. Okay, so in spite of their economic and social advantages, they experience among the highest rates of depression, substance abuse, anxiety disorders, somatic complaints, and unhappiness of any group of children in the country. It is becoming increasingly clear as research accumulates that increases in material wealth do not translate into advantages in emotional health. On the contrary, they can translate into significant disadvantages. The disadvantages of growing up wealthy, right? Why would there be disadvantages to growing up wealthy? And how does that sit with everything that we've tried to accomplish and for our kids, right? So this population that she's talking about statistically uses drugs to the same extent as the extremely poverty-stricken in this country. Okay? They are just as beset with emotional and psychological disorders as the poorest of the poor in our culture. How can that possibly be? Why is affluence a measurable disadvantage in our society? Right? Do you even think? Do you agree that that's possible? To disadvantages? There are lots of reasons that it might be true, but I think that the real thing is to, like, as adults, have a godly view of wealth and material possessions. Okay, so we feel it, our children are going to feel it. There are all these pulls towards stuff. Their friends have things, and therefore they must have things. Okay, and we need to use these times as a real teaching moment. Okay, we do not value a person for what they possess. We value a person because of who they are. And as parents, we need to take the focus off of having as much as our neighbor for ourselves first, right? And then our kids have a chance at catching that from us. I mean, social media doesn't help. But if we act that way, then our kids are going to internalize the value, and they're going to come to believe that that is what life is all about, having as much as their neighbor. And so instead we need to focus on these inner qualities that can, in fact, produce real happiness. And so do you really believe that it is internal qualities, like, within the emotional and spiritual makeup of your kids that will ultimately produce happiness in them? Do you really believe that? And that happiness has absolutely nothing to do with what your children possess? I mean, we all say we believe it, but don't you want your kids to have nice stuff, right? And can you believe that maybe it is in the possession of these wants over needs that actually operates against their happiness? Okay, it's character and the ability to put the needs of other people ahead of their own, right? That's really valuable. It's mercy and compassion and being grateful. It's knowing that there is a greater purpose to their lives than just the acquisition of stuff. Okay, and so building these things into our kids might bring them happiness. Okay, but nothing plastic or paper is going to bring them happiness. And so do you ever deprive yourself or your kids of something that you could possess? All right, so that you learn to not be possessed by the stuff, just for that reason alone. Okay, so we need to be able to talk openly and honestly with our kids about the values that are competing in their hearts. And we need to be able to examine those things in the light of Scripture, and we need to cultivate an outlook that asks what it really looks like to live a life well. Okay, it's the only protection that we really can give our kids against the power of the world that's trying to use them to take advantage of them. So teaching things like delayed gratification is probably a good idea. Okay, we can get almost anything we want immediately. Is that a good thing? It's a convenient thing. And so we need to work toward things like real friendship, okay, that requires sacrifice. There's no such thing as relationships that don't require sacrifice. We need to work towards things that challenge our selfishness. And this isn't really just the job of a parent, okay? This is all of our jobs with our brothers and sisters around us, because most of us never really grow up in this area. Okay, we need to be able to discuss and to work towards a life that's rooted in something real. Okay, a life rooted in principle. And the quality of your internal life is going to mirror the value of the things that you pursue. And if the thing that you pursue is a broken cistern that can never be filled, then you're going to do some serious damage to your soul as you spend your life trying to fill it. Okay, so anyway, the product of this pleonexia that drives our culture is, one of the products is massive debt. And I don't really need to elaborate on that one at all. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. But God is interested in our freedom. And there's a process of learning that there's a process of gaining freedom in these areas under grace. So God's not looking at you badly because you're in debt, all right? He's just trying to free you from the slavery of the world. And maybe, in a practical sense, that may mean that some of us need to seek some godly advice. Okay, we may need to turn to trusted friends and tell them where we're at. And we also need to recognize that this really is a spiritual issue. Okay, bondage to interest payments is bondage nonetheless. And God wants to free us from that so that we can live a life of generosity. Okay, so remember, we are the people on that island way up at the top, right? Like, we are in the stratosphere economically, and we've totally lost that perspective. Okay, there we go. All right, so finally, real freedom, it's just the freedom to give. Okay, that's how you know you're really free in this area. Okay, being open-handed and generous with your wealth is the only real measure of a godly perspective on your blessings. Okay, so both need-based, when people need money, being able to give in that sense, and the act of disciplined giving enable us to have a real sense of reality about how much we really have. All right, so God blessed us so that we may be a blessing. And Jesus said that it's more blessed to give than to receive. Okay, so do you believe what Jesus said? I mean, we all know that Jesus said that. We all assent to the fact that that's true. But is it more of a blessing in your life to give the things that you have than it is to possess more things? I think that there's like a hiccup there, right? Like, we can say it, do we live it? And so, frankly, this is like a dividing line for some of us. How you answer this question, like, determines the trajectory of your spiritual life in this area. Okay, giving is the only real measure that we have of where our heart's really at in this area. So that was fun. That's all I have.